Spurgeon here with Revzilla, and today I'm on top of Kawasaki's new Ninja 400. This is a pretty special launch for us because not only did Kawasaki bring us out here to Sonoma, California to ride this bike on the street, they also brought us to Sonoma Raceway where we're getting to turn laps on this little bike. And it is extremely exciting for me because I've never ridden this track before and I am having a blast. But it also speaks to some of the controversy that's surrounding this motorcycle and the fact that there's a lot of folks out there that are worried that maybe it's become too big to be called a beginner bike, and that's what we're really going to set out to answer in the first ride review of this motorcycle. Now, as for me, I'm going to go turn a few more laps, and then I'll meet up with you guys in the pits.
So why the bump in displacement? Well, the fact that Kawasaki has brought us to a racetrack can't be ignored. And it's clear that on one hand, they want to take folks that are using this for a race bike or for a track bike, and they want to give them a more competitive advantage, especially when you're considering, organizations like Moto America, which are now opening up their junior bike class to include bikes like the Ninja 400. Now, on the other hand, you've got new riders, and some of these new riders are voicing concerns that they're afraid that if they buy a bike too small, they're going to outgrow it within 6 to 12 months. So the other reason for the displacement bump was to give folks more of a bike to grow into. From a track perspective, Kawasaki nailed it. This thing is absolutely a blast out there. I've had nothing but fun today riding this thing out there on the track. I'm laughing in my helmet. There's gonna be a lot of folks who are gonna be really excited to take this and use it as a track weapon. However, according to Kawasaki data, only about 7% of people are actually doing that. The other 93% are sticking primarily to the street, and of those 93%, half of those folks are new riders. And yes, this is gonna be more of a bike to grow into, but has it lost its approachable nature? And to answer that question, we really can't do that here on the racetrack wearing leathers. We need to strip out of this gear, put on some regular street clothes, and take this thing out in the street and ride it as if we're a new rider to see, yes or no, is this still gonna be a beginner bike?
So here we are north of San Francisco, riding down some beautiful California roads where most people are going to be spending their time with the new Ninja 400. Now, when we first got onto the bike on the track and we're running this thing up to the red line, yeah, you could feel that there was much more power up top. But what surprised me the most was how much power you're going to notice in the mid-range once you get this thing out on the backcountry roads. We rode the highway up here, and I was really impressed because now on the highway, I'm cruising around 70 miles an hour and I'm sitting just around 6,500 RPM. So it's a lot less buzzy and there's a lot more torque and oomph in that 6,000 to 8,000 RPM range. And I think a lot of people are going to be really impressed with that, especially compared to the old bike where you really had to run it high all the time. And Kawasaki could have stopped there. They could have said, hey, we put a new engine in this thing and called it a day, but they didn't. There's a lot of changes that they really made to this motorcycle. For example, when manufacturers give you a bigger engine, more power, usually you see the weight increase with that. And actually, we're seeing a weight decrease here. So they lost about 17, 18 pounds off of this bike over its predecessor. And I mean, it really kind of comes into play with the handling. This thing is super lightweight, super neutral in the handling. You can just kind of look where you want to go and it falls into line. So when you factor in the weight savings and the fact that it's an all-new frame, a shorter wheelbase, steeper rake angle, and an all-new suspension, the handling on this bike is absolutely superb. Now, I say the new suspension. For a larger rider like myself, I'm around 220 pounds. Normally the suspension is going to be a fail point, no matter what I'm looking at. And yes, if I was going to use this as a dedicated track bike, I would spend some money on the suspension. But I think for 90% of the folks out there who are just looking to get this for the street, I think you're going to be really impressed with what this suspension has to offer. You're now 41 millimeter fork up front, and it's a new shock in the back. Still just 5 positions of preload, but I think if you're a little bit heavier, you crank that preload up a little bit, you're going to be set to go. the changes that they have made hasn't really affected the geometry of how the rider sits on this motorcycle. It's still a nice upright seating position, and I think for a lot of folks, because they see it as a sport bike just looking at the exterior of the motorcycle, they don't realize that this isn't that aggressive, full race tuck that you get from a 600cc or 1000cc race replica bike. They actually pulled the handlebars a little bit further back towards the rider. It is still a clip-on bar, but it's got a little bit of a rise to it as opposed to a low clip-on, and you just sit in this nice position. Now, the one area that I think a lot of people had questions with is the seat height and whether or not it was going to be too tall for certain people. Our camera gal, Allie, is 5'4". She hopped on this. She was able to flat foot it. She had no problem, super comfortable sitting on the bike. For myself at 6'3", I'm a little bit cramped up down below. I would have liked to have tried it with the taller seat. My real complaint from an ergonomic standpoint is my right heel. You can see it back there just constantly smashing against the exhaust, and that's a problem that I seem to have with a lot of Kawasaki's. If you remember my Z900 Mods video, that was a change I made to try and buy me some room back on the exhaust on that bike, and I'm having the same issues here. I was talking to some of the guys at the track, and their biggest complaint with the bike from a track perspective was the brakes. And I don't see that being an issue for most people riding this bike on the street. I was actually really impressed with, 1-2 finger pull at the lever, new 310mm rotor up front with Nissan calipers. I think this thing does a very adequate job of slowing this package down from a braking perspective. And keep in mind, this bike is now sub 370 pounds, so there's not a mass to slow down with this. The one area I was disappointed with were the levers. I wish that they would have gone with adjustable levers. I can't imagine it would have cost Kawasaki, that much more money to put adjustable levers on this, especially for new riders that are looking at this. Being able to really get comfortable with where the levers sit, I do think is important. So speaking of new riders, we've got the information on this bike. We've got the main points down. So let's go answer our question. Is this still a beginner bike?
So the answer to the question you've all been waiting for is no. This bike has not become too big for the beginner rider. I mean, Kawasaki walks up to that line, they dance with that line, but they don't cross the line. What you're getting with the extra bit of displacement is you're getting that bump in mid-range power. This bike does feel more comfortable on the highway. And for those of you out there that are using this as a track weapon, you are getting more power up top than ever before. But it's not just about the power. Think about everything else you're getting. You're getting better brakes, better suspension, a more competent chassis. I mean, this thing handles like it's on rails, and it weighs less. All of those things are good for beginner riders as well as advanced riders. And Kawasaki's doing all of that without raising the price. This bike still comes in its base form for $4,999. Hell, let's just round that up to a cool $5 grand. Now, if you want the ABS version, that's going to cost you an extra $300. And if you want the fancy green race paint job, that's going to be a few extra dollars as well. But really, look at the bikes that you're going up with in this class. You got the R3, the CBR 300R, you've got the Suzuki GSX 250, whatever. I mean, other than the RC 390, this bike pretty much just smokes the entire class, in my opinion, and that's based after only 2 days of riding. Now, I think there's gonna be a lot of folks out there that are gonna be really stoked on this bike, and if you're thinking about adding this to your stable, or maybe you just want some additional information about my personal time on the track with this motorcycle, now would be a great time to head over to Common Tread, where you can read my first ride review of this motorcycle. And as always, make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube to keep up with all the content we have rolling out at Revzilla.com. As for me, Kawi's coming to pick up this bike, and I got a restaurant over yonder that's selling fresh seafood, and they're serving cold beer. I know where I'm heading. I want to thank you for joining us for this first ride review of the Kawasaki Ninja 400. I'm Spurge. Enjoy the ride.